The cameras found him instantly. 3,000 people packed into the Washington Hilton Ballroom, champagne glasses catching the light, tuxedos and evening gowns forming a sea of American power, and every lens swung toward one man's face. Donald John Trump sat frozen at the Washington Post's table, his signature blonde hair perfectly coiffed, his expression hardening into something between a grimace and a forced smile. The President of the United States was speaking directly to him, and the entire room was laughing. Not with him, at him. It was April 30th, 2011, a night that would alter the trajectory of American history. In those 5 brutal minutes, as Barack Obama dismantled Trump's credibility before the nation's most influential journalists, politicians, and celebrities, something shifted in the universe. A humiliation so complete, so public, so devastating that witnesses would later describe a man transformed by rage. What nobody in that ballroom could have known, what nobody could have predicted, was that they were watching the birth of a political revolution built entirely on revenge. Before we go deeper into this story, take a second and hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and let us know where you're watching from. I'm curious to know how far these stories travel. To understand the magnitude of what happened that night, you have to understand the 2 men at the center of this story, their origins, their wounds, their unshakable need to be seen as winners in a world that sorts people into victors and losers. Donald John Trump was born on June 14, 1946, in Queens, New York, the 4th of 5 children raised in a 23-room mansion in the Jamaica Estates neighborhood. His father, Frederick Chris Trump, was a self-made real estate developer who had built an empire of middle-class housing across Brooklyn and Queens. Fred Trump was not a gentleman. He was known for his relentless work ethic, his shrewd business, instincts, and his belief that the world was divided into 2 kinds of people, killers and everyone else. Fred drilled this philosophy into his son from childhood. He told young Donald repeatedly that he was a king, a winner, destined for greatness. But there was a darker lesson embedded in that message. To be anything less than dominant was to be worthless. Humiliation was the ultimate defeat. Shame was a fate worse than failure. At 13, Donald's rebellious behavior, including secret trips to Manhattan to collect knives, prompted Fred to send him to the New York Military Academy, a strict institution where discipline was enforced with rigid precision. The experience shaped Trump in contradictory ways. He learned to project confidence, to command attention, to never show weakness. But beneath that armor, the fear of humiliation remained, a wound that never fully healed. Trump graduated from the Wharton School of Finance at the University of Pennsylvania in 1968 and joined his father's company. By 1971, he had taken over as president of what he renamed the Trump Organization, and he set his sights on Manhattan, the glittering prize his father had never conquered. His mentor during these early years was Roy Cohn, the infamous attorney who had once served as Senator Joseph McCarthy's chief counsel during the communist witch hunts of the 1950s. Cohn taught Trump the tactics that would define his career. Attack, never apologize, always claim victory regardless of the facts. When someone hits you, Cohn advised, you hit back 10 times harder. This philosophy shaped Trump's approach to every challenge. He didn't just want to win. He wanted to destroy anyone who opposed him. He didn't just want success. He wanted his enemies to acknowledge their defeat publicly and painfully. The 1980s made Donald Trump a household name. Trump Tower rose on Fifth Avenue, a monument to gilded excess. His face appeared on magazine covers. His name became synonymous with wealth, ambition, and braggadocio. He wrote The Art of the Deal, a bestseller that cemented his image as America's ultimate dealmaker. But the 1990s brought humiliation of a different kind. His casinos filed for bankruptcy. His marriage to Ivana collapsed publicly and painfully. Tabloids mocked him. A 1993 biography was titled Lost Tycoon and declared him a public laughingstock. Trump clawed his way back, using bankruptcy laws to restructure debts, using sheer force of personality to stay relevant. Then came The Apprentice in 2004 and Resurrection. The reality show transformed Trump from a fading mogul into a cultural icon. His catchphrase, "You're fired," entered the American lexicon. Millions watched him perform the role of the ultimate boss, the decisive leader, the man in control. But television fame wasn't enough. Deep inside Donald Trump, there remained an insatiable hunger for validation, for respect, for the kind of power that couldn't be questioned. By 2011, he had found a new avenue for attention: politics. Barack Hussein Obama II was born on August 4, 1961, in Honolulu, Hawaii, a place that would become central to his identity and, ironically, to the conspiracy that would define his relationship with Trump. His parents' story was unconventional for its time. His mother, Ann Dunham, was a white woman from Kansas, idealistic, intellectually curious, drawn to the wider world. His father, Barack Obama Sr., was a Kenyan economist who had come to Hawaii on a scholarship, becoming the University of Hawaii's first African foreign student. They married in 1961, but the union was brief. When Barack was 2 years old, his father left for Harvard and eventually returned to Kenya. The young Obama would see his father only once more, during a brief visit when he was 10 years old. Obama's childhood was marked by movement and adaptation. His mother remarried, this time to an Indonesian man named Lolo Sotoro, and young Barack spent several years in Jakarta. He learned to navigate different cultures, different languages, different expectations. He learned to observe, to listen, to find common ground among people who seemed to have nothing in common. At 10, he returned to Hawaii to live with his maternal grandparents, Stanley and Madeline Dunham, in their modest apartment. He attended Punahou School, an elite private academy on scholarship. He was one of the few black students there, a reality that forced him to grapple with questions of identity that most of his classmates never had to consider. In his memoir, Dreams from My Father, Obama wrote about the complexities of growing up biracial in America, the search for belonging, the negotiation between worlds that didn't always understand each other. He experimented with drugs and alcohol, by his own admission, pushing away questions about who he was. But Obama also possessed something that would define his political career: an extraordinary ability to remain calm under pressure. Whether it was genetic temperament or learned behavior, Obama developed what advisors would later call his no-drama approach. Where others might rage or panic, Obama analyzed. Where others reacted, Obama waited. He graduated from Columbia University in 1983, worked as a community organizer in Chicago, and then attended Harvard Law School, where he became the first black president of the Harvard Law Review. He taught constitutional law at the University of Chicago. He entered Illinois politics, served in the state Senate, and then, in 2004, delivered a keynote address at the Democratic National Convention that electrified the nation. 4 years later, he stood on a stage in Chicago's Grant Park as President-elect of the United States, the first African-American to hold the highest office in the land. His election was historic in ways that transcended politics. For millions of Americans, particularly Black Americans, Obama's victory represented the fulfillment of generations of struggle. It seemed to prove that the arc of history truly does bend toward justice, that a black child born in America could achieve anything, that the country's original sin of slavery might finally be transcended. But Obama's presidency also awakened forces of resentment that had long simmered beneath the surface of American life. The Tea Party movement emerged within months of his inauguration, drawing on fears about government overreach, but also, some argued, on something darker: a discomfort with the idea of a black man wielding executive power. It was into this volatile environment that the birther conspiracy was born. By April 2011, Barack Obama had been president for more than 2 years. He had passed the Affordable Care Act, navigated the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression, and ordered the mission that would, the very next night, kill Osama bin Laden. He was, by any measure, one of the most powerful people on earth. And yet, he couldn't escape the shadow of a conspiracy theory so absurd it defied logic, one championed most loudly by a reality television star from Queens. The birther movement didn't begin with Donald Trump, but he transformed it from a fringe conspiracy into a mainstream obsession. The theory was simple and poisonous. Barack Obama was not born in the United States and was therefore constitutionally ineligible to be president. Despite Obama's birth certificate from Hawaii, despite birth announcements in Honolulu newspapers from 1961, despite the testimony of state officials from both parties, the conspiracy persisted. For Trump, birtherism became a vehicle for something he craved: attention. In early 2011, he began appearing on television shows, Fox News, The View, CNN, NBC's Today, demanding that Obama release his long-form birth certificate. He claimed to have sent investigators to Hawaii. He hinted at dark secrets yet to be uncovered. The media couldn't resist. Here was the star of The Apprentice, one of television's biggest celebrities, inserting himself into presidential politics with incendiary claims. Ratings soared. Trump's name dominated headlines. What Trump was doing, whether consciously or not, was questioning the legitimacy of the first black president in terms that carried unmistakable racial undertones. The birther conspiracy suggested that Obama was not truly American, that he was other, that he didn't belong. For Obama, the situation was maddening. Here was the President of the United States, Commander-in-Chief, leader of the free world, being forced to address absurd questions about his place of birth. The indignity was profound. On April the 27th, 2011, just 3 days before the White House Correspondents Dinner, Obama did something unprecedented. He held a press conference to release his long-form birth certificate to the public. He addressed the media with barely concealed frustration. "We do not have time for this kind of silliness," Obama said. "We've got better stuff to do. I've got better stuff to do. We've got big problems to solve." He referred, without naming Trump directly, to sideshows and carnival barkers, distracting the nation from serious issues. Trump characteristically declared victory. He took credit for forcing the president's hand, claimed vindication, and continued to suggest that questions remained. The stage was set. What Trump didn't know, what almost no one in the world knew, was that as the White House prepared for the Correspondents' Dinner, Obama had just authorized the most consequential military operation of his presidency, Operation Neptune's Spear, the raid to kill Osama bin Laden. The weight of this secret was almost unimaginable. Obama had reviewed the intelligence, consulted with his national security team, and made the decision to send Navy SEALs into sovereign Pakistani territory without informing the Pakistani government. If the mission succeeded, it would be one of the defining achievements of his presidency. If it failed, if the SEALs were killed or captured, if the intelligence was wrong, if the helicopters crashed, it could end his political career. On April 30th, 2011, as Obama's speechwriters put the finishing touches on his comedy routine, a team of Navy SEALs was preparing to infiltrate a compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan. The helicopters would launch in less than 24 hours. The president carried this secret with him into the ballroom, his mind, as he later wrote, thousands of miles away, even as he smiled for the cameras. "My face was fixed in an accommodating smile," Obama would write in his memoir, "as I quietly balanced on a mental high wire, my thoughts thousands of miles away." The irony was almost too perfect. Here was Trump demanding birth certificates and questioning legitimacy, while Obama bore the burden of a decision that could kill or capture the world's most wanted terrorist. Here was the reality television star playing at politics while the actual president made choices that would echo through history. The Washington Hilton was filled with the nation's elite: journalists, senators, cabinet members, Hollywood celebrities. George Clooney was there. So was Sean Penn, Matt Damon, and dozens of other famous faces. The annual dinner had evolved from a modest gathering into what one reporter called a black-tie mashup of the Super Bowl, the Oscars, and Davos, Washington style. The atmosphere crackled with excitement and self-congratulation. This was Washington at its most glamorous, the moment when the powerful celebrated their power, when journalists mingled with the people they covered, when everyone pretended that partisan divisions could be bridged over champagne and canapes. And seated at the Washington Post table, directly in the president's line of sight, was Donald Trump. The evening began with the usual rituals of Washington pageantry: cocktails, air kisses, the careful positioning for photographs. Trump arrived with his wife, Melania, his blonde pompadour immediately visible above the sea of tuxedos. He was there as a guest of the Washington Post, an invitation extended to one of the most talked-about potential presidential candidates of the moment. Polls showed Trump leading the Republican field. His birther crusade had elevated his political profile to unprecedented heights. For weeks he had dominated cable news, had appeared on every major network, had forced the president himself to respond. In Trump's mind, this was a victory lap. He had arrived at the summit of Washington power, invited to dine among the elite he had always sought to join. He worked the room with practiced ease, shaking hands with senators, posing for photographs with celebrities, accepting congratulations from people who sensed which way the political winds were blowing. John Christopher Bua, a White House correspondent seated nearby, watched Trump work the room. He noticed the real, estate mogul's swagger, his apparent confidence that he belonged among the nation's power brokers. Trump moved from table to table with the practiced ease of a man accustomed to being the center of attention. But Bua also noticed something else, something that would become clear as the evening progressed. Trump was being watched, not with admiration or curiosity, but with anticipation. People whispered behind their hands. Knowing glances were exchanged. There was electricity in the air, the kind of tension that precedes a storm. The Washington elite knew something that Trump, for all his media savvy, had failed to recognize. He had walked into an ambush. The president had been humiliated for weeks by birther nonsense. Now the chief birther himself had taken a seat in the president's arena. Barack Obama was many things: professorial, cautious, sometimes maddeningly deliberate. But he was not a man who suffered fools, and he was certainly not a man who let an opportunity pass, unexploited. The dinner proceeded through the usual courses, the usual speeches, the usual acknowledgments. The room buzzed with anticipation. People kept stealing glances at Trump's table, kept checking their watches, kept leaning toward each other to whisper speculation about what was coming. Then President Obama took the podium. The room fell silent. 3,000 people turned toward the stage. But the real focus of attention was not the president. It was the man seated at the Washington Post table, the man with the golden hair who had spent months questioning whether Barack Obama was really American. Obama began with jokes about his birth certificate, playing the opening clip from The Lion King as his supposed birth video. The room erupted in laughter, the easy laughter of people who knew they were about to witness something memorable. Trump's expression remained neutral, watchful. He had been in show business long enough to recognize the setup. Obama's comedic timing was impeccable. He had been practicing these jokes for days, working with his speechwriters to sharpen every punchline. Jon Favreau, his chief speechwriter, had crafted the material with surgical precision. This was not improvisation. This was a carefully planned operation. But this wasn't just entertainment. This was strategic, and it was personal. David Plouffe, Obama's senior advisor, later acknowledged the political calculation at play. The Obama team saw Trump as a useful symbol of the opposition's extremism. Elevating him, mocking him publicly, served a purpose. It painted all potential Republican challengers with a brush of birther conspiracy. It demonstrated that the president could handle his critics with wit rather than anger. It was supposed to be a display of strength, a demonstration that Trump was too absurd to take seriously. What none of them anticipated was the fire they were igniting. What none of them understood was that for a man like Donald Trump, a man whose entire psyche was built around the avoidance of humiliation, this night would become a wound that never healed. Then Obama turned his attention directly to his target. Donald Trump is here tonight. The room stirred. Cameras swung toward the Washington Post table. 3,000 pairs of eyes focused on the man with the golden hair. What would you do if you were Donald Trump in this moment, surrounded by people who are about to watch you get eviscerated by the most powerful man in the world? Would you laugh along? Would you walk out? Would you plot your revenge? Share your thoughts in the comments. Obama continued, his voice carrying the effortless rhythm of a man in complete command of his audience. Now I know that he's taken some flack lately, but no one is happier, no one is prouder to put this birth certificate matter to rest than the Donald, and that's because he can finally get back to focusing on the issues that matter. Obama paused, letting the anticipation build. Like, did we fake the moon landing? Laughter exploded through the ballroom. What really happened in Roswell? More laughter. And where are Biggie and Tupac? The room howled. Cameras captured Trump's face. Tight, controlled, the ghost of a smile that didn't reach his eyes. But Obama wasn't finished. But all kidding aside, obviously we all know about your credentials and breadth of experience. The word obviously dripped with irony. The audience leaned forward. For example, no, seriously. Just recently, in an episode of Celebrity Apprentice at the steakhouse, the men's cooking team did not impress the judges from Omaha Steaks. Obama's delivery was surgical. He was taking Trump's greatest source of pride, his television show, his role as the decisive leader, and reducing it to absurdity. And there was a lot of blame to go around. But you, Mr. Trump, recognized that the real problem was a lack of leadership. And so ultimately, you didn't blame Lil Jon or Meatloaf. You fired Gary Busey. The room erupted. Obama nodded as if in genuine admiration. And these are the kind of decisions that would keep me up at night. Pause. Well handled, sir. Well handled. The laughter was continuous now, wave after wave. Trump sat motionless, his jaw set, his eyes fixed on some middle distance. Those close enough to see his face noticed the color rising in his cheeks, the almost imperceptible tremor of restrained fury. But Obama had one more card to play. Say what you will about Mr. Trump, he certainly would bring some change to the White House. An image appeared on the screens. The White House transformed into a garish casino, complete with the word Trump in giant purple letters, along with hotel, casino, and golf course. The ballroom exploded in its biggest laugh of the night. The image was ridiculous, cartoonish, impossible. A visual encapsulation of everything coastal elites feared about Trump's aesthetic sensibilities. Then came Seth Meyers, the Saturday Night Live comedian hired to deliver the evening's entertainment. If Obama's roast was a precision strike, Meyers' routine was carpet bombing. Meyers took the stage with the confidence of a man who knew he was about to deliver career-defining material. He had written jokes about Trump for Saturday Night Live's Weekend Update segment, but this was different. This was the White House Correspondents Dinner. The president was in the audience, and so was the target. Donald Trump has been saying that he'll run for president as a Republican, which is surprising, since I just assumed he was running as a joke. The laugh that erupted from the crowd was different now, sharper, more pointed. This wasn't the polished wit of a president maintaining plausible deniability. This was a comedian going for blood. Trump's smile had vanished entirely. His face was stone. Melania sat beside him, her expression carefully blank, her hand resting on the table as if ready to leave at a moment's notice. Donald Trump often appears on Fox, which is ironic, because a fox often appears on Donald Trump's head. More laughter. The cameras kept cutting to Trump's face, capturing every micro-expression, every tightening of his jaw, every flicker of contained fury. If you're at the Washington Post table with Trump and you can't finish your entree, don't worry, the fox will eat it. The hair jokes kept coming. For a man as famously vain as Donald Trump, each one was a small humiliation. His hair had been the subject of mockery for decades, but never like this. Never in front of 3,000 of the most powerful people in America. Never with cameras broadcasting every moment to millions of viewers. Donald Trump said recently he has a great relationship with the blacks. Though unless the blacks are a family of white people, I bet he's mistaken. This joke hit different. It cut to the heart of Trump's racial politics, his awkward attempts to demonstrate diversity credentials, his fundamental disconnect from communities he claimed to understand. Gary Busey said recently that Donald Trump would make a great president. Of course, Gary Busey also said that. The absurdist non sequitur underscored the point. Trump's political aspirations were a joke. His endorsements came from reality TV personalities, not serious political figures. His campaign was entertainment, not governance. I like that Trump is filthy rich, but nobody told his accent. His whole life is models and gold leaf and marble columns, but he still sounds like a know-it-all down at the OTB. This was perhaps the cruelest cut of all. For all his wealth, for all his towers and casinos and beauty pageants, Trump couldn't escape his queen's origins. He wasn't old money. He wasn't sophisticated. He was an outer borough kid with a fortune, and the real elite could tell the difference. Meyers went on for nearly 15 minutes, returning to Trump again and again. Each joke landed like a hammer blow. Each laugh from the audience was another nail in the coffin of Trump's dignity. Graydon Carter, the editor of Vanity Fair and a longtime Trump critic, was seated nearby. Years later, he would describe the look that came over Trump's face that night, a look of such profound discomfort that it seemed to border on physical pain. It was a humiliation, Carter said, absolute humiliation. When the evening finally ended, Trump and Melania left quickly, bypassing the usual after-parties. Witnesses described their departure as a near bolt for the exit. In the limousine afterward, what thoughts went through Donald Trump's mind? What promises did he make to himself as the Washington night blurred past his window? We may never know for certain, but the evidence of what came next suggests a man transformed by a single, burning purpose. In the days following the dinner, political observers expected Trump to retreat. The humiliation had been so complete, so public, that conventional wisdom suggested he would step back from presidential politics. Instead, something strange happened. Less than 24 hours after the dinner, Obama announced to the world that Osama bin Laden was dead, killed by Navy SEALs in a daring nighttime raid. The news dominated every headline, pushing the Correspondents' Dinner off the front pages. For most Americans, the event became a footnote. But for those who had been in the room, for those who had witnessed Trump's transformation in real time, the dinner took on prophetic significance. Roger Stone, Trump's longtime political advisor and confidant, watched his friend closely in the weeks that followed. Stone, a self-described political dirty trickster who had worked for Nixon and Reagan, understood something about the intersection of ego and ambition. "I think that is the night he resolves to run for president," Stone later told PBS Frontline. "I think that he is kind of motivated by it. Maybe I'll just run. Maybe I'll show them all." Michael D'Antonio, who would later write a biography of Trump, observed the same pattern. "Donald dreads humiliation and he dreads shame," D'Antonio explained. "And this is why he often attempts to humiliate and shame other people." The psychology was textbook. Trump had been wounded in the deepest possible way, publicly among his peers, by a man who represented everything Trump wanted to be: effortlessly cool, universally respected, wielding real power rather than television simulacra. The only cure for such a wound in Trump's worldview was victory. Not just any victory, but a victory so complete that it would retroactively transform the humiliation into a mere stepping stone. Within weeks of the dinner, Trump announced he would not seek the presidency in 2012. The timing seemed to confirm that he had been chastened. But those who knew him understood the real calculation. 2012 was too soon. The wound was too fresh. He needed time to plan, to prepare, to ensure that when he struck back, the blow would be devastating. For the next 4 years, Trump continued to build his media profile. He continued to push the birther conspiracy even after releasing Obama's birth certificate should have ended it. He kept his name in the headlines, kept his face on television, kept the connection to politics alive. And on June 16, 2015, Donald Trump descended a golden escalator in Trump Tower and announced his candidacy for President of the United States. The Trump who emerged from that escalator was different from the reality TV star of previous years. There was a hardness to him now, a willingness to say things that other politicians would never dare to say. He attacked immigrants, attacked his opponents, attacked the media, all with a ferocity that shocked the political establishment. Something fundamental had shifted in Donald Trump during those years between the dinner and his campaign announcement. The experience of public humiliation, rather than diminishing him, had clarified his purpose. He had spent 4 years nursing his wounds, studying his enemies, preparing for the moment when he could strike back. The psychology was consistent with everything experts knew about narcissistic injury. When someone whose self-worth depends on external validation experiences public shame, the response is rarely acceptance or growth. Instead, the wound festers. The humiliation becomes an organizing principle. Revenge becomes not just desirable, but necessary for psychological survival. Trump had learned something else from that night: the power of spectacle. Obama had commanded the room through wit and timing. The audience had followed his lead, laughing on cue, directing their attention wherever he pointed. Trump understood, perhaps for the first time, that political power and entertainment power operated by the same rules. Whoever controlled the spectacle controlled the narrative. His campaign announcement was itself a piece of theater. The golden escalator, the paid audience, the inflammatory rhetoric about Mexican immigrants. It was designed to dominate the news cycle, to force every other story off the front page, to make Donald Trump the center of attention. And it worked. But one target remained constant: Barack Obama. If you had been humiliated the way Trump was humiliated, would you have let it go? Or would it have consumed you the way it consumed him? Let me know your thoughts below. Trump's campaign became in many ways a systematic dismantling of Obama's legacy. He promised to repeal the Affordable Care Act. He promised to reverse Obama's executive orders. He promised to undo the Iran nuclear deal. Every policy position could be read as revenge. Every attack on the establishment was, at its core, an attack on the people who had laughed. But it wasn't just policy. It was personal. Trump continued to question Obama's legitimacy, his competence, his very Americanness. The birther conspiracy had evolved into something broader, a challenge to everything Obama represented. There was also something else, something darker and more primal. Trump had recognized in that ballroom something that the establishment hadn't yet grasped. Millions of Americans felt the same way he did. They felt mocked by coastal elites, dismissed by educated professionals, condescended to by journalists and politicians who claimed to know better. Trump's genius, if it can be called that, was recognizing that his personal humiliation could be transformed into a political movement. Every attack on him became an attack on his supporters. Every laugh at his expense became a laugh at everyone who had ever been looked down upon by the powerful. "They're not after me," Trump would later say of his critics. "They're after you. I'm just in the way." It was a brilliant piece of political judo, taking the weapon that had been used against him and turning it into his greatest source of strength. The political establishment laughed, just as they had laughed at the Correspondents' Dinner. Trump was a joke, they said, a sideshow, a carnival barker, to use Obama's own phrase. Seth Meyers, from his perch at late night, continued to mock Trump throughout the campaign. In 2011, I told some jokes about our current president at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, Meyers later reflected. Jokes about how he was unqualified to be president. Some have said that Knight convinced him to run. But Meyers, like so many others, had underestimated the power of humiliation as a motivating force. What Trump had learned, what he had internalized from that night in the Washington Hilton, was that laughter could be transformed into rage, and rage could be transformed into power. Every person who had laughed at him, every journalist who had dismissed him, every elite who had looked down their nose at his gold-plated towers and his Queen's accent, they would all learn the cost of their condescension. The transformation was complete. The wounded ego had become a political weapon, unlike anything American democracy had seen before. On election night 2016, the ballroom of the New York Hilton Midtown, a different Hilton, but the symmetry was unmistakable, filled with Trump supporters watching the returns. The early results from Florida showed Trump performing better than expected. Then North Carolina fell, then Ohio, then Pennsylvania. In the Clinton campaign headquarters at the Javits Center, designed with a glass ceiling that Hillary Clinton planned to symbolically shatter, the mood shifted from celebration to confusion to horror. The pundits who had spent 18 months declaring Trump's candidacy a joke, a stunt, an impossibility, fell silent one by one as the electoral map turned red. Barack Obama watched the returns from the White House. He had campaigned tirelessly for Clinton, had mocked Trump at rally after rally, had staked his legacy on preventing this outcome. Now he watched his worst nightmare unfold in real time. At 2:40 a.m. Eastern Time, the Associated Press called the election for Donald J. Trump. In the Trump campaign headquarters, pandemonium erupted. Supporters screamed and cried. Trump stood on stage with his family, looking almost stunned by what he had accomplished. And somewhere in that moment, perhaps in the quiet of his own mind, Donald Trump surely remembered April 30th, 2011. The laughter, the cameras, the president's smug jokes, the way Melania had squeezed his hand on the drive home. He had done it. He had shown them all. On January 20th, 2017, Barack Obama and Donald Trump rode together from the White House to the Capitol for the inauguration ceremony. Photographs from that morning show two men who could hardly have been more different. Obama relaxed, smiling, making small talk. Trump tense, jaw set, eyes forward. The limousine ride must have been one of the most uncomfortable journeys in American political history. Two men who despised each other, who had traded insults for years, who represented fundamentally incompatible visions of America. forced to share a confined space during the most ceremonial moment of the democratic process. What did they talk about? The weather, the size of the crowds gathering on the mall, the peaceful transfer of power and its place in democratic tradition? Whatever words passed between them, the body language told a different story, one of barely contained antagonism, of wounds that would never heal, of a confrontation that had been building since that night in the Washington Hilton. The peaceful transfer of power is one of democracy's most sacred rituals. It demonstrates that power belongs to the people, not to any individual, that leaders come and go, but the nation endures. But beneath the ceremony lay something more primal, a confrontation between two visions of America, two styles of leadership, two men who had become inextricably linked by a night of public humiliation. Trump's inaugural address was unlike any in modern history. He described American carnage, rusted factories, crime-ridden cities, a nation in decline. The speech was dark, angry, defiant. It rejected the optimism that had characterized American inaugurals for generations. It was the speech of a man who had fought his way to power against the opposition of every establishment institution. Former President George W. Bush reportedly turned to Hillary Clinton after the speech and said, "That was some weird shit." The comment, leaked to the press, captured the disorientation that many in the political establishment felt. This was not how presidents were supposed to talk. This was not how America was supposed to be described. Something had fundamentally changed. Obama sat behind Trump throughout the speech, his face carefully neutral. He had spent 8 years in that office, had delivered speeches from that podium, had tried to heal the nation's wounds and move it toward a more perfect union. Now he listened as his successor described an America that bore no resemblance to the one Obama believed he had led. Michelle Obama made no effort to hide her displeasure. Her expression during the ceremony became an instant meme, the visible manifestation of everything the Obama coalition felt about what was happening to their country. The contrast between the two families, the Obamas' dignified restraint, the Trump's triumphant swagger, captured something essential about what had just happened to America. And somewhere in that moment, perhaps as he placed his hand on the Bible and swore to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution, Donald Trump surely remembered April 30th, 2011. The laughter, the cameras, the president's smug jokes, the long limousine ride home with Melania, the silence between them heavy with unspoken rage. He had done it. He had shown them all. In the years that followed, Trump would methodically dismantle Obama's policy achievements. The Affordable Care Act's individual mandate was eliminated. The Paris Climate Agreement was abandoned. The Iran nuclear deal was scrapped. Regulations were rolled back. Appointees were replaced. It was as if Trump was working through a checklist, erasing Obama's legacy line by line. But the real confrontation was symbolic. Trump refused to attend the White House Correspondents Dinner throughout his presidency, the first president in decades to skip the event. He attacked the media relentlessly, calling them the enemy of the people. He cultivated a base that saw elite mockery as a badge of honor. Obama, for his part, emerged from retirement to campaign against Trump in 2018 and 2020. He gave speeches warning about threats to democracy, about the dangers of demagoguery, about the consequences of division. The man who had once roasted Trump so effectively now spoke about him with something closer to alarm. Here's the thing, Obama said in one campaign speech. The preposterous has become normal. But the preposterous had won. The man who had been mocked as a joke had become the most powerful person on earth. The Correspondents' Dinner, once a celebration of Washington's self-satisfaction, became a symbol of elite disconnection. The laughter that had filled the ballroom in 2011 now echoed differently. as a warning about the dangers of underestimating anyone. The consequences of that night in April 2011 continue to reverberate through American life. Trump served 4 years as president, implementing policies that divided the nation like few leaders before him. He appointed 3 Supreme Court justices, fundamentally reshaping American jurisprudence for a generation. He cut taxes, rolled back environmental regulations, and restricted immigration. He was impeached twice by the House of Representatives, first for pressuring Ukraine to investigate Joe Biden's family, then for inciting the January 6th insurrection. Neither impeachment resulted in conviction by the Senate. He lost the 2020 election to Joe Biden, but refused to concede, claiming fraud despite dozens of failed legal challenges. On January 6, 2021, his supporters stormed the Capitol in an attempt to prevent the certification of Biden's victory. 5 people died in connection with the attack. It was the worst assault on the Capitol since the British burned it in 1814. Trump was eventually indicted on multiple felony charges across several jurisdictions. He became the first former president in American history to face criminal prosecution. And then, remarkably, he came back. In 2024, Donald Trump won the presidency again, defeating Vice President Kamala Harris in an election that shocked pollsters and pundits who had predicted his political demise. The man who had been humiliated in 2011, who had been counted out after January 6th, who had been indicted on 91 felony charges, stood once again in the Oval, office. The return was proof of something Trump had understood since that night at the Washington Hilton. Humiliation, properly channeled, could be transformed into power. Every attack on him had strengthened his bond with supporters who saw their own grievances reflected in his persecution. The White House Correspondents Dinner continues to be held each spring, but it has never recovered its former prestige. Trump boycotted every dinner during his first presidency and has shown no interest in attending during his second term. The event that once drew Hollywood celebrities and commanded national attention has become a shadow of itself, a reminder of an era when Washington's elite believed their mockery carried consequences. Obama, now in his 60s, remains an influential figure in Democratic politics. He and Michelle published memoirs, established a foundation, and built a presidential library in Chicago. He campaigns occasionally for Democratic candidates, but has largely retreated from the daily combat of politics. He rarely speaks about Trump directly anymore, preferring to address the broader challenges facing democracy without naming his nemesis. But those who were in the Washington Hilton on April 30, 2011, carry the memory with them. They remember the laughter, the cameras swinging toward Trump's face, the precise moment when something shifted in American history. Some blame Obama for awakening a sleeping giant. Others argue that Trump's ascent was inevitable, that the forces he represented would have found another champion. Historians will debate the question for generations. What remains undeniable is the power of humiliation, its ability to wound, to fester, to transform rage into action. Donald Trump sat in that ballroom and absorbed every laugh, every slight, every condescending glance. And he converted that pain into something unprecedented, a political movement built on the promise of revenge against those who had looked down on him and everyone who felt looked down upon. The story of the 2011 White House Correspondents Dinner is ultimately a story about America itself. It is a story about a nation divided between those who laugh in the ballroom and those who feel mocked from afar. It is a story about the dangerous assumption that some people's ambitions can be dismissed, that some grievances can be ignored, that the rules of politics will always hold. On that warm April night, Barack Obama demonstrated his mastery of the Washington game, his wit, his timing, his ability to command a room. He was, in that moment, everything a president is supposed to be: poised, powerful, in control. He had faced down conspiracy theories about his birth, navigated an economic crisis, and was about to order the killing of America's greatest enemy. He had earned the right to mock his tormentor. But there was something he couldn't see, something no one in that glittering assembly could see. Humiliation does not dissipate with laughter. It compounds, it calcifies, it becomes the foundation for empires of resentment. The people who laughed that night, the journalists and senators, the celebrities and power brokers, believed they were witnessing the end of something. They thought Trump was a sideshow who had been properly put in his place. They returned to their after-parties convinced that the natural order had been restored, that the establishment remained firmly in control, that ridicule was an effective weapon against pretenders to power. They were wrong. What they had actually witnessed was a beginning. In that ballroom, surrounded by the laughter of the powerful, something inside Donald Trump crystallized into diamond-hard resolve. Every smirk, every knowing glance, every burst of condescending applause became fuel for a fire that would, 5 years later, burn the establishment to the ground. Donald Trump absorbed the wound and spent the next 14 years ensuring that everyone who had laughed would understand the cost. He didn't just defeat the political establishment. He transformed American politics into a permanent confrontation between those who mock and those who feel mocked. Whether this transformation is tragedy or triumph depends entirely on where you sit, in the ballroom or outside it. History will judge both men, Obama for underestimating the power of the forces he was unleashing, Trump for channeling those forces in ways that shattered democratic norms. Neither emerges unblemished from the story of that night. Both changed America in ways neither fully intended. But one truth transcends all perspective. 5 minutes of laughter changed America forever. And nobody is laughing now. What do you think really happened that night? Was Obama's roast a justified response to Trump's birther conspiracy? Or was it the spark that ignited everything that followed? If you had been in Trump's position, would you have let the humiliation go? Or would it have driven you the way it drove him? And here's the harder question. If you were Obama, knowing what you know now, would you have delivered those jokes differently? Or does a president have every right to defend himself against conspiracy theories, regardless of the consequences? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us where you're watching from and what this story means to you. If this video made you think, if it showed you something about power, humiliation, and revenge that you hadn't considered before, then hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. We bring you stories like this every week, the moments that changed history, told with the depth and detail they deserve. And share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Because history doesn't just happen to us. We make it. With every laugh, every slight, every underestimation of what wounded pride can accomplish. Until next time.